Okay.
We're live.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Paul Goodman. I'm the founder of Goodman Masson. We're delighted to welcome you to this afternoon's seminar, which we've arranged in conjunction with Q-Bot. Start by apologising for the slightly late start, and we'll, if everybody's okay, we'll add on 5 minutes at the end, 5 or 6 minutes at the end to compensate for that. I'd like to take the opportunity, first of all, to say how much we've enjoyed recruiting for the social housing sector over the last 10 years. And how privileged we feel to have had the opportunity to do so. A few words of general introduction before I introduce our panel. A recent article in Inside Housing noted that the UK's housing stock accounted for 20% of the country's carbon emissions. 80% of that stock will be in use in 2050. So housing stock is a central factor in meeting the country's carbon emission targets, and the largest amount relates to the existing housing stock. The projected cost of decarbonising the social housing stock is £104 billion by 2050. Government's committed to 3.8 billion over 10 years. Of course, funds will come from other sources, and what has come from government helps, but many questions still need answering. How will the funding gap be closed? In what order should you invest? How do you apply technology? Where's the workforce going to come from? And what's the best means of employing them? The clock's ticking, and the reason we've set up today is to discuss how to access government funds and how to spend them wisely. We'll be discussing a number of key questions after each of the speakers has given a 5-minute introduction. There'll be plenty of opportunity to throw in your comments, and if you want to do so, please send them to us on the chat box, and if we have time, we will certainly come to them. I was going to say we'll have a hard stop at 5 o'clock. If I can now extend that to say 6 minutes past 5 with everybody's permission, then we can make up for lost time. And so to the panel. First of all, Russell Smith. Russell's a chartered civil engineer and the founder of Retrofit Works, a not-for-profit cooperative that seeks to alleviate fuel poverty by reducing energy bills, create healthy homes, and hopefully to help us achieve carbon net zero. Leigh Fairbrother is a specialist in energy efficiency with a strong focus on innovation in fuel poverty. He joined Q-Bot in 2020, and prior to working with Q-Bot, he worked largely as a freelance on fuel poverty and energy switching within the housing sector. He studied as an architect and had some time in the retail sector, as well as having a spell working on overseas conservation projects. Tania Jennings is the Principal Domestic Energy Officer for the London Borough of Ealing. She's the project lead, and I hope I've got this right, Tania, for the SHDF-funded Ealing Energy Sprong Whole House Retrofit Scheme. She's also the project lead for West London Green's Home Grant Local Authority Delivery Scheme, which covers 13 London boroughs. Matt is the project director for Social Housing Decarbonation Fund. He's a chartered engineer with an MSc in guided weapons and is a recent graduate of the MPLA, the Major Projects Leadership Academy. He was appointed OBE in the Queen's Birthday Honours List in 2013. So I'm going to ask now each of our speakers to give us a 5-minute presentation. I'm trying to hold them all to 5 minutes. Matt, if it's okay, we can begin with you. So if you'd like to begin by sharing your screen, over to you, Matt.
Yeah, thanks very much, Paul, and good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully Arabella will pop the slides up and we will get going. As I say, I'm the Programme Director for the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund. What I'm going to do really briefly is just run through 7 slides in pretty rapid order that talk to the fund. The fund itself is a Conservative Party manifesto commitment. It was announced in 2019. Hopefully the slides will come up in a moment. Many of you will be aware that we're releasing the fund in a series of waves. We've started off with the demonstrator scheme. We're now working through our wave 1. We've got wave 2 to come, and I make no bones about the fact that I'm here speaking today in part because we need to increase the knowledge of the fund, and I need to make sure that all those who are involved in the social housing sector understand how to apply. Now, I'm having some real snags getting the slides up whilst Arabella continues to fight to get these to show. In terms of the fund itself has a variety of different objectives. Saving carbon is clearly one of them, but actually alleviating fuel poverty is another. Now, these two can be seen sometimes in opposing forces, and actually one of the things that we need to unpack as a sector is how do we make this work and achieve the objectives of saving carbon for the nation, but actually making sure we don't put more people into fuel poverty. The other thing we're trying to do is develop the green economy. We're trying to develop the retrofit supply chain. We're also trying to make sure that we deliver on our promises to raise the general energy performance capabilities of our homes to at least EPCC by 2035. And we might have a conversation about whether that's going to be advanced any further. Arabella, for some reason the slides haven't come up, but I'm going to carry on. I have the slides on my own screen, so I'll carry on talking to them. In terms of what have we done so far, we've been running a demonstrator project for the last sort of 18 months. This is 18 projects around the nation. It's been showing us the challenge of being able to raise the energy performance of social housing to a particularly challenging standard. We selected EPCC plus a 50 kilowatt hour per meter square per year target. Lots of learnings are coming from that, and we're sharing those learnings with a learning community, and we're taking the learnings and cascading those forward into the design of future waves. In terms of future waves, we've recently announced the fact that and Arabella, I'm going to have a go sharing my own slides, okay? Because for whatever reason, they're not coming up unless anybody else can see them. So I'm going to have a go sharing now, and let me see if I can get them up. If you could let me know whether the slides have come up, Paul.
Yes, you're good, Matt.
Okay, well, we recently announced the successful award winners of the Wave 1 Fund, which is turned out to be £179 million worth of government grants, 69 projects, 20,000 properties around the nation. We're just about to get that going. It's really important that we build on the momentum started with Demonstrator, and we get ourselves into a place where we're starting to deliver our Wave 1 bids. But as I said earlier, one of the reasons that I'm here is fundamentally to talk about Wave 2 and the opportunity that this is presenting. The government announced £800 million over the spending review coming the next 3 years for the continuation of this journey. And that funding is going to be released again in a series of waves. We anticipate putting our competition guidance out in the relatively near future, with a competition bid window opening up towards the back end of the summer, with the view to releasing the funding to be delivered over the next 2 to 2.5 years, hopefully to allow again the market to scale and for us to generate some momentum. My final slide really is about summarizing where we are. I mean, this may be motherhood and apple pie to you all, but what have we learned? Well, decarbonising the nation's housing stock isn't easy. There are 30 million domestic homes. Many millions of them need to be upgraded. Social housing landlords are, I think, increasingly professional in this area, and they're developing strategies, but they have to have those conversations at board level about how do we get our stock to a net zero standard. We've got to keep our tenants in mind. You know, the tenants are central to this. Tenant refusal at a mass scale would be really unhelpful. We have to build a supply chain that can do this work at pace. And frankly, there is no do nothing option. So this hopefully is a cracking opportunity for people to get engaged and to start the journey on the route to net zero. I'm going to stop there, Paul. That was slightly faster than I'd anticipated, but hopefully that's a good start for 10.
Matt, thank you. Matt, thank you very much. And you hit 5 minutes just about on the dot, actually. So that's very impressive. And thank you. I'm sorry about the technical issues. Over to Russell. Russell, your 5-minute introduction, please. Russell, we can't hear you at the moment.
There we go. Is that better?
I heard yes. That's right. Yes.
Hi.
Yeah.
Great. Hi everybody. I'm Russell Smith. I'm presenting with 2 hats on today. Paul introduced me as the Director of Retrofit Works. The specific topic that we're talking about today is to try and give you some guidance on how to make a decision if you're looking after a large number of individual properties, how to look at the huge number of options you have ahead of you, and the funding that people like Matt are presenting to you, all of the constraints that you might have and the prioritisation that you might have with individual customers and tenants, etc. How to work out what you actually should be spending your money on. And we do that with some of the tools that Parity has developed, and Retrofit Works uses those tools on a daily basis in order to deliver the retrofit programs that it has across the country. What we are able to do is do that for a large number of people at the moment. So we've got around about 18 million UK homes in the database now. Obviously, not all of those are social landlords, so about 1.5 million social homes in the database right now. All the larger landlords are using these tools in order to guide their investment decisions, and it's all based on data. So I'll whiz through how we deal with the data and how we arrive at effectively investment decisions, which is what everyone's really trying to get their head around. You know, if a fantastic opportunity like the social housing decarbonisation fund pops up, what are the best properties that we should be targeting within our stock in order to spend that money most wisely to achieve the 50 kilowatt hours per square metre per year target that Matt is aiming for? How can we find the properties that will reach that target for the least cost, or for a particular technology that we're aiming to try and improve, or whatever it might be? I'm sure Leigh will come on to how Q-Bot approach that with their technology. Certainly, it's all about data in the first instance. We work with open data that you can download from the DLUC website from that support the EPC database. Additional surveys that in-house surveyors and freelance surveyors might have collected. Perhaps you can access the XML files that would have been collected as part of the EPC process. But also there's a large number of different sets of data that you would have accumulated over the years on the assets that are held by those individual properties. What we're able to do is crunch all that together, provide a platform that enables you in the first instance up here to be able to say, okay, well, what have we got? What are the things that we actually got with our properties that enable us to focus in on what a program might look like? But then one of the best things that we're very proud of is to be able to run scenarios on that, and to say, okay, well, if we had £20,000 of property, which of those in our housing stock might reach a particular performance, such as the 50 kilowatt hours per square metre per year that Matt Harrison's outlined. And of course, you want to be in a position to say, okay, we've done some work now, we update the data, you run the scenario on your stock, and you get to a point where you can prove that you've made progress. And you, especially someone, it might be a regulator looking at your own performance as a stock, you want to be able to show where you're at. And we've got great platforms that enable us to be able to look at this kind of information, including how the performance of the stock overall might reduce over time in terms of carbon emissions as the grid decarbonises. You want to be able to predict that sort of performance over time. Reporting this as well in terms of the visuals, it makes a lot of sense to people that are planning programs on the ground. Which of those properties are performing better than others? You'll see a property here that's green, that's got a much better EPC performance. The one over here that's red's got very poor. You can immediately start to target the people that might need the most help, especially at the moment with energy bills going up. These ones that are the E, F and G properties, they'll be the ones that are performing the worst and have the higher bills. So if you have other pots of money that pop up that enable you to target the most vulnerable, these are the sort of tools that enable you to do that. And that can be applied on a area-wide basis for a geography, not just for a stock that might be within a social landlord's overall performance. And targeting particular techniques is useful as well. So this is something we do when we know we might have funding for a particular type of work, be it underfloor insulation or SR heat pumps. You can start to target the properties that don't have those things in the first instance. But defining investments is really quite a cool place to go. In other words, what are your priorities in organisation? What point in the future do you want to have, either be at a SAP C or above, or you want to be completely decarbonised? At what point do you want to get there? What measures might you want to understand? So running scenarios on that data to better understand all the things that are possible. With we were able to apply 3,000 different measures on every individual dwelling within a housing stock in order to work out what's the cheapest way to have the biggest impact over that period of time. And you can compare those scenarios alongside one another, so you can end up comparing them relatively easily to see where you might end up. Where do you get your biggest bang for your buck, in effect? At the end of it, once you've run a scenario, you've picked the scenario that you think is your favourite, we actually end up with a package of measures for each individual dwelling. So in effect, for those of you who are aware of PAS 2035 as a standard, you've already got the package that's set out so that if you're advising a tenant or you're speaking to a contractor or running a procurement, you have an idea of that what's likely to be going ahead before you've even set foot in the property. Clearly, this isn't the truth until someone's done a site survey, but it really helps you to focus on what your supply chain should be going at before they've set foot on the ground. One thing that's critical we're finding for clients as well is to be able to understand very clearly the supply chain issues there will be going forward. So one thing we do within the tool, we predict how many what sort of trades will be needed over the period of that investment scenario. So I think it's very obvious to most people there's a big gap between the number of people working in the retrofit sector right now and what we need to get to net zero. So we can model those differences in scenarios.
Russell, I'm going to have to. Oh, thank you, Russell. Okay, I was just about to say we're going to have to. We're going to have to move along. But thank you. That was really, really hugely insightful. Leigh, you're up next.
Thank you, Paul. And thank you, everybody, for joining us this afternoon. You should be able to see my screen. I'm from Q-Bot. We are well recognised in the industry for our underfloor insulation robot, or Betty, as she's affectionately known. What you've actually got on screen there is a latest Ferrari version, Mark 7, capable of installing some of the smallest and tightest underfloor voids possible. We've got other technologies that we've brought and are bringing to market, but we're talking today about the challenges in retrofit and how we've overcome those technical challenges. So, as Paul alluded to, 80% of the stock that exists today will still be around, and a third of that was built pre-1960 with suspended timber floors, and a lot of that pre-1919 with solid floors. Very difficult to treat properties. And something that we've looked at about a third of the UK and more in Northern Europe of how we can address the heat loss through those. And there's been a lot of resistance to traditional methods to resolve that in properties because it's disruptive, it's expensive, it's intrusive, and it's messy. We work with clients, and as Russell alluded to improve data to help people assess which properties are most suitable for which measures. We've developed a very, the very clever people at Q-Bot have developed a very smart machine learning algorithm to help process that to find the properties most suitable for underfloor insulation and those that will most likely to benefit from funding at the same time. And then we can deploy a robot. And this is a technology which is being used and deployed and specified increasingly. It allows us to access areas that would otherwise be inaccessible to humans, to put a high performance insulation foam in a very short period of time at a very cost effective result with a very low per sat point cost improvement. The whole process is digitalized and recorded using our install management system, which leads to very high levels of quality assurance. We can provide evidence from both the survey stages right the way through to install. And therefore what you get is removal of cold air coming into properties, being drawn up through the existing ventilation systems and stack ventilation and negative pressure into the property. And then you apply the insulation in layers to create a physical barrier between the cold air, whilst remaining, keeping the void space underneath ventilated to ensure it's in good health. And in doing that, you've reduced the impact of cold air coming into the property, reducing the requirement for heat. Mainly properties will heat up more quickly and stay warmer for longer. The savings are significant to the end user, which is increasingly important with a focus on rising fuel costs and fuel poverty. But equally, from the position of our social landlord partners, it will improve SAT performance by between 2 and 12 points, moving properties often from band D up into band C. We know that there are a number of measures you can use out there or in combination to decarbonise properties. When we look at the cost effectiveness of those, loft is always the best starting point, but underfloor insulation, where we have suspended floor, compares competitively. The average savings based on 2018 energy costs were about £150 per year. We're predicting that these will rise to between £250 to £300 per year based on current energy prices, and we're going through a piece of work with the Energy Savings Trust to realign those savings figures now. And therefore, the payback period is decreasing. We think we're currently sitting somewhere between 10 and 16 years, but with the increased pressure on energy prices, that is expected to progress further as we go along. So there are a whole number of technical challenges we know around installing properties and rising to this challenge, but there are a number of technical solutions out there driven by data and digital construction techniques, which will make this easier and more straightforward as we go forward. Paul, back to you.
Thank you very much, Leigh. Very interesting and very Mars rover looking. Tania, over to you.
There we go. Great. So one of the things that I often get asked is, why do I get asked so many of these things when I'm just an officer? And my answer is, I can show you the money. Just at a glance, this is what we've managed to do in West London with Ealing leading. You know, like a lot of people, I'm here with two hats. Is to help private homeowners. A good chunk of my funding is also to get our own social in the right direction. We've got about 1.6 million from the SHDF demonstrator, which we're using for our energy sprung houses. Some of you may know is a little bit like wrapping a tea cozy around the house. Why retrofit? You know, I think that we've already discussed that so many of these houses will still be here. We have 15,000 in our stock. We've got about 140,000 in the borough. And one of the real challenges is, what do we actually know? You know, we're big fans of Parity. We use their data a lot. We've got sort of the advanced modeling. We've got loads of filed EPCs, existing EPCs. As part of our Energy Sprung project, a company called Maplango did a great piece of work for us that used a lot of the open source data that Parity uses as well as our housing data that we have. But how do we really use that? You know, tables are great. I can look at this table all day long. It's super. It tells me a lot. But what it doesn't tell me is what do I do next? And I think this is one of the real challenges that we have right now is, what do we do with this data? And knowing your intervention points is the key that I really want to drive home to people who maybe aren't sure what they're going to do next. It's great to know that you have a lot of solid wall properties. If you don't know when the best time to do that is, then you're not really ready for these funding opportunities. And I think a lot of boroughs, ourselves included, have had to be very reactive to the money that comes from BEIS. So, you know, as my mom would say, a coupon is only helpful if you were already going to buy that item, where if BEIS come to us, you know, with all the love in the world, we love the money, but if they come and say, you have to fund air source heat pumps, and we weren't ready for that because we hadn't already done a piece of work around insulation, then that money doesn't actually help us. So a lot of what we've got to do is think about, what do we think is coming down the pipeline and what do we know we've got to do? And that's where a lot of these studies have become very helpful. As an example, with our Energy Sprung projects, we found out that, you know, we had all of our estates ranked based on typologies, so brick houses, flats, etc. And we decided to do our Energy Sprung on our second worst, where we knew that nearly 78% of the properties were in the D to G. Our first worst, most of that's getting knocked down. Made long before I had a chance to come play, but we now know that we can address those with model, hopefully, at least to get us started. And that really did come from the data and looking at what is the typology on that estate, when's the last time it was updated, do they need new roofs, do they need new walls? And one of the reasons that we chose Energy Sprong specifically is because we only control 4% of the solid wall properties in our borough, which means all we can really do is influence the market to help the rest. So if I can put a tea cozy around my 590 solid wall pre-1918 houses, hopefully I can help drive the cost down so that my other schemes can help with the private market a bit more. We've also taken a real area-based approach, and I'm going to show you an upsetting map. This is why. If you look at the map on the left, the one in red, that's our LSOA deprivation map. It largely collates with our fuel poverty map as well. And the purple map is our COVID instance, which has been a really, quite tragic vindication of what we've known for a really long time, that if you live in fuel poverty, you are much more susceptible to respiratory illnesses. So this is one of the biggest reasons why so many fuel poverty officers across London have become retrofit experts, because the best way to reduce the costs on the NHS and, unfortunate excess winter deaths is to get those people out of their cold homes. In our 13 borough coalition for Green Homes grant, this is the fuel poverty map. And I show you this because obviously some areas are hot red. Okay, I know I can go straight to them. I can walk street by street and I can know, I can't throw a penny without hitting somebody who could use it because they're in fuel poverty. But in some of the areas in our coalition, like Kensington and Chelsea, Hammersmith and Fulham, it's a lot harder to spot that fuel poverty. It doesn't show up with a bright red beacon. So one of the pieces that we've done just briefly is we've looked at our fuel poverty figures. We've figured out which of our boroughs are higher than the UK average for fuel poverty, which are higher than the London average. And we're then targeting those in an LSOA, again, worst first basis. This was also a very helpful exercise for us with Green Homes grant, because I said, well, it looks like 14.7% of England's fuel poverty is in my coalition. I would like 14.7% of that funding, and God bless BEIS, they gave it to me. So we're going to put that to work. But I think this has actually been a really good metric for if you're not sure what to ask for, you have to know what you want to do with it. You've got to look at your actual capacity to deliver, but don't be afraid to ask for your fair share. This was our fair share and we fully intend to spend it. We also did a secondary piece to that where we looked at, of the properties that we know are E, F, and G, we didn't really look at D's too much, just because what we found with the surveys is that most of the D's end up being C's and a lot of the E's end up being D's. So because some of these have caps, we focused on E, F, and G, looked at how many people are on benefits receipt, council tax discount, and other measures of income inequality. And then we could go to BEIS again and say, we know that 618,000 people are eligible for the LAD. We're just asking for funding for like 1,200 of those.
Tania, I'm going to have to hurry you along a little bit.
That's
okay.
it. But I think this is the challenge, is that we've been able to go back and say we're asking for funding for 0.004% of the people that we know are eligible for these programs. So hopefully we'll continue to get more to help the other 99% of people that need us.
So I think our first question will continue us on this theme actually, and Tania, I'll come to you first actually to answer it before we see what other members of the panel got to say. But the first question is, what understanding of the stock of your borough do you need in order to make a successful application?
I think what we had to know was how many houses can we actually control what happens in them? How many leaseholders do we have? How many social housing? How many landlords are we targeting already, because we may say we know that they're not MEIS compliant? And so that was a big piece of our data dive, was figuring out how many people do we already know need these programs, And then it was about talking to suppliers. One of the first things we did was talk to Q-Bot. And that's actually why our coalition, I said, if I was a big wodge of funding, could I have your entire capacity next 2 years? So then every time someone would call Q-Bot and say, could we use you to apply for this grant? They would say, you better talk. So we ended up with 13 people, 13 boroughs in our coalition, because so many of them wanted things like Q-Bot. And so that was really helpful for us to kind of say, well, even if we just targeted solid wall houses with suspended timber floors, we know Q-Bot could do this piece. We can talk to our installer network to see how many can do EWI, and then we can build on that. And it was really similar for SHDF. We looked at how many little boxy marshmallow houses that we had that we thought would be suitable for Energy Sprong. And we had about 5,000. And so that was our starting place, is, you know, pick something that you know you can do and then expand on it if you get more money.
And thank you, Tania. And Matt, can we bring you in for the view from your side of the fence on this?
Yeah, just repeat the question, because I was looking at the questions in the live Q&A, unfortunately, rather than listening. So
okay, so what understanding of the stock of your borough do you need in order to make a successful application?
So I think, I mean, Tania's just highlighted the benefit of being able to use some of the tools like Parity, such that you can pull together a really effective bid. What we've seen is clearly those who have a good understanding of their stock, both for the demonstrator wave and now wave one, have been the most successful putting a compelling bid together. So, you know, all I would say is that this does start with the fundamentals. If you're going to try and raise your stock to net zero, you need to understand it. And repeatedly, the lessons we're learning, and you know, Tania's on our learning community, and we share these things. People think they understand their stock, and then they found out that they actually don't. And repeatedly, we're finding that the assumptions that people have made aren't working when it comes to the reality of getting detailed designs done. The PAS 2035 process that you have to go through is demonstrating that our stock understanding is weak. So I think we're in the foothills of a very big journey to start doing digitization at scale, and that will allow us to start doing the targeting that we've talked about. Russell talked about it here very clearly. Let's understand our stock. Let's frankly spend a bit of time and effort in bringing some of these new tools to bear, and then let's make sure that when the opportunities do arise, you can take the data and then map it to your strategy that you've agreed with your board, and then come up with an effective bid. So that's, you know, it's super important. And without giving too much away, one of the things we're investigating as part of the fund is whether we can actually top slice some of the money that we've got in the fund to make it available for stock assessments, so we can make it available more broadly in front of a bid being put together. We aren't quite there yet, but it's something that we're certainly thinking about. So it's super important, Paul.
Thank you. And Russell, I imagine that you've got some interesting analytical insights that you can provide.
Oh, for sure. I mean, one of the things that we do with our tool is actually apply it on a policy basis as well. So we've got there's a couple of angles there. We can apply it to something called the English Housing Stock Condition Survey as well. So you could say, okay, well, if there were some policy tweaks that could be made with what Matt and colleagues are having a go at the moment, what impact could they have? And a particular one that I'm sure Matt and colleagues have been chewing on is, you know, what's the target we should aim for with the funding? So is it 90 kilowatt hours per square metre per year? Is it 50? You know, those kinds of things can be trialled with using data in advance. But back to Matt's point, and I think virtually every landlord we've ever worked with, they think they've got better data than they really have. And one thing you will find as well, that given there's been a lot of merging over the years, outside of the local authority owned stock, everyone's got it all in different databases and underneath a cupboard somewhere and what have you. So, you know, merging all this stuff is actually really quite a critical task, and getting it right is really important. Imagine if you've got one field out or one row difference on your spreadsheet, you've got a completely different strategy, right? So I think absolutely start with the basics. and don't be afraid to put some boots on the ground to actually get out there and to verify this stuff. Don't just take it as gospel that because you've got a spreadsheet and someone says it's awesome that it actually is, because you could end up in a whole heap of trouble. So yeah, I've got lots of insights, but I don't want to be indiscreet on that basis. Yeah, people have got to appreciate that what they've got probably needs a lot more work before they even get to the start line.
And it does sound like there's a premium on the analytical capability that exists within each social housing provider.
Yeah, but we and others can provide that. We're not the only people that do this kind of work. And the idea is that we want to be able to provide the landlords with the tools to do it themselves, really. You don't want to be spending money on consultants. We want to be able to give them the tools to be able to make their own decisions, right? So that's the aim of our game. Yeah,
no, I understand. That makes good sense. And Leigh, what's the view from the Q-Bot end of the world?
I'd have to echo a lot of what's already been said, and certainly by Russell. A lot of the data that's out there is either inaccurate or incomplete. We especially find when it comes to flooring, because it's been the forgotten measure for so long, it was too difficult to address. Very little data is ever collected on it. What we find with suspended timber floors is, especially on EPCs, you get a lot of false negatives. So lots of properties have a mix of both floor types, and depending on where the surveyor may have been stood at the time, then potentially marked incorrectly. That was a big driver in why we developed some machine learning technology to be able to look at the visual characteristics of properties, to analyse large quantities of EPC data, to be able to offer useful insights to clients on the energy performance and the probability of their archetypes having suspended timber floors. And then, as Russell alluded to, we provide that information to a customer and say, this is the highest probability of being suitable. There's a cluster here of properties all built, say, in 1929. If this archetype is as we expect, then you're effectively unlocking a huge amount of data value. So then go out there and do a series of technical surveys, do retrofit assessments, bring back that data, and then backfill the rest of what we know. So we've been very successful helping clients on their LADS 1A, 1B funding applications, and with some of the SHDF ones as well.
Right. Okay. That's very helpful. Catherine, are there any comments coming from anybody that are worth sharing? Or you'd like to share?
We've had lots of questions. So we've got: is there any news on the government's EPC action plan? I don't know if Matt, that looks like one for you, maybe.
So there's lots going on with EPC. Not least around how we will address the changes to SAP in the future. So there's a change to SAP and the SAP calculations. There's also an awful lot going on around how do we define the appropriate energy performance standards for each of the major tenures, for owner-occupier, for private rental sector, and for social housing sector. And certainly from a social housing perspective, the government has committed to considering a consultation around establishing a new minimum energy efficiency standard for the social housing sector as part of the upgrade to what's called the Decent Homes standard that currently exists but is going through a refresh. So I think coming to us in a place reasonably soon, I think, will be a consultation around where do we want to set those standards for social housing, and what are the consequences of doing that, and clearly cost and the potential perverse things occur that when you do go for a statute requirement, you can create lots of things that you haven't thought through carefully. So that's why we're going to go out and consult. So I hope that covers off some of it, probably not all.
Is there any other members of the panel like to come in on that? Okay, so sorry, Russell. Okay,
no, it's a complicated area. As Matt says, whatever you push in one area, you're going to get pulls in lots of other different things because everyone's working around a framework. But the consultation groups that we're involved with all seem to be doing all the right sorts of things. So we just need to get cracking on with it, don't we? Really.
So let's go to our next question. Well, I think we're going to start with you on this one, Matt, which is how do I apply for Wave 2 government grant funding to decarbonise social housing?
It's an excellent question. Well done. Nicely teed up. So We have the money in the bank, £800 million that the government has announced will be available over the spending review period, which is the next 3 financial years. We're going to go and lock down the guidance in the next couple of months, and we'll make that available to as you know to the sector as soon as we can. And we'll be looking to open a competitive bid window. There'll be a mechanism to go for where applications can be submitted probably from the end of the summer. So likely the end of August, early September will be a sort of a window from then, probably for 8 to 10 weeks. The key thing in my mind, though, is that we have got some help available. If you're new to bidding in this environment, we have the Social Housing Retrofit Accelerator. This is an organisation that we pay for that will provide masterclasses in how to do this. It will provide one-to-many tuition. It will also then provide one-to-one support in pulling your bid together. So if you Google Social Housing Retrofit Accelerator, it will take you to a place where you can register and get some help for free. So please do so.
And if you're on the receiving end, Tania, do you want to comment on this?
I mean, I think I will be frank that we didn't apply for SHDF 1 bidding because we just didn't have capacity. We have so many programs on. We're getting more capacity. That's great. But at the moment, it was sort of me struggling to stay afloat. One of the great things, and I'm genuinely grateful to BEIS that they have said that this next round of bidding won't be till the end of summer, is because we said what we really want is to deliver the programs we've got right now, to feel like we've got, you know, some actual learning, and that we don't just feel like we're at an Amway sales meeting where everything's on paper and it all looks great, but has anyone actually ever sold anything? Probably not. So this extra window has given us such a great opportunity to talk to a lot of suppliers. We've actually got a presentation tomorrow on graphene heating, which might be the greatest thing since Skip Intro on Netflix. So we're looking at a lot of options like this to see, you know, air source is great for the houses it can be put into. Air source in a 3rd-story flat, not unless you're doing the whole building. So we're trying to look at what are our options for things like conservation areas. We're exploring solar tiles. Whew, fancy, because we can get them past planning. And so I think that one of the things that we asked for and thankfully got was that time to really do the exploration up front, but then also that 3-year delivery window lets us go back out to market and say, would you like a job for 3 years? Like 15,000 houses just sitting here waiting to be retrofit. And so that's really helpful for us, because then it gives the market that security that I think a lot of them felt was sort of pulled out from underneath them when the voucher scheme ended. And, you know, we understand the policy reasons for a lot of these rapid changes, but it's that longevity that I think is going to be what turns the market around. And really, hopefully, get suppliers waving their hands in the air saying, yeah, we want to deliver for you. And train lots of apprentices. Please take like all the apprentices.
I think you're on mute, Paul.
Yes. Sorry, thank you. Where the workforce is going to come from is definitely an interesting question. Russell, what's your perspective?
Well, it's the critical path to getting to net zero. We can talk about the digital this and the scanning that and having money available, but if we don't attract enough people that actually want to work in this sector, we've got absolutely no chance. I delivered a piece of work for the Construction Leadership Council this time last year called the National Retrofit Strategy, which is trying to position the idea that we, as an industry and government in partnership, we can have some kind of long-term vision and a structure that would enable us to deliver all of this work. Thankfully, social housing has various frameworks. It's got asset managers that know how to look after their stock for a long period of time, and it sort of goes across democratic cycles, so you don't have the ups and downs that the owner-occupied sector does. So we needed something else to bridge that gap, if you like. Anyway, we're still looking for some excitement at the end of that proposal, but the bottom line is that we uncovered the fact that when we did our policy analysis. In other words, what measures do we need to install in every house in the UK to reach net zero by 2040? We aim for, in line with the IPCC's requirements. We need about 400,000 new people in our sector, and that's if we start now. If we leave it another year, we're going to need 425,000. If we leave it another year, we're going to need 500,000. You know, so these are really uncomfortable figures for everybody, but it's a tough one. You can have debates about whether you dial down the levels of insulation and put more heat pumps in and put more wind turbines in the North Sea, but the bottom line is it's just an enormous number whichever way you look at it, and we just need to crack on immediately. And at the moment we don't have a programme for attracting and putting training courses in place to get those people into the sector.
And Leigh, where's technology going to go that's going to take up some of the slack here?
I think there's an opportunity for making some of these processes more repeatable and more consistent, and that's something we've spent a lot of time looking at. And there's other technologies and robotics that we have in development here that we'll see commercialised. But I don't think technology alone is going to be the solution. I agree with Russell that there's a huge skill shortage that we need to address, and part of that I think comes through the realization that we need to bring a lot of younger people through into these industries and make them more attractive. I mean, part of what we've done, you know, operating a robot is achieved with an Xbox controller, which is something I'm not massively familiar with, but generations below me are. There's new types of roles, retrofit assessors, retrofit advisors, retrofit coordinators, which are required to facilitate this. And those are fundamentally important. I'm really pleased to say we've been interviewing from the first cohort from Generation Green on their retrofit advisor program, and the quality of young people coming through that is excellent. And that's a fantastic scheme, but it's a very small scheme. It needs to be larger, and there needs to be more invested into not only recruiting and training these people, but also from the percentage of funding that's applied to projects, which is classed as management or administration. I think that needs to be broadened, because the engagement piece, Matt, you mentioned about tenant and resident refusals. It is a large issue. People, you know, in many cases feel that retrofit is something being done to them rather than for them or on their behalf. And therefore, a lot of emphasis needs to be put on how we better engage with residents and customers to be able to make that journey come through. And we can only do that with people.
So I'm going to chuck us along to the next question, if that's okay. And what seems to follow from talking about how do I apply, and we've moved around that subject quite a bit, is once you've got the money, how do you get to the people who are most in need? And I think, Jessica, you were touching on some of that in what you presented. Do you want to start off with that one as well?
Yes, I do. So I think going back to Leigh's point about getting young people involved and people all of a sudden, because of energy bills coming to us, I've had more calls from residents in the past week than probably in the past year, asking for solar panels, asking for insulation. How do I get to net zero? You know, specifically the ones who are council tenants, because I think a lot of them are actually aware that we have Green Homes grant funding, but that's for a self-selected, primarily owner occupier. So now a lot of our social tenants are saying, well, you have these programs for people who own their houses, but I don't own my house. What can I possibly do? You know, and we get this from private renters a lot as well. Well, what if my landlord isn't willing to make a 1/3 contribution to get the Green Homes grant? Am I screwed? Could I pay that? Sorry, my language. So I think that we're feeling the frustration of the tenants, both social tenants and private tenants. So one of the ways that we're reaching out to them is, you know, just to let them know we have a 2030 climate commitment. You know, we're not waiting for 2050. That's 20 years after the house burnt down. We've got the water tanks on site right now. We're working with Parity very closely to look at our stock to really understand what is the worst first. You know, and I think one of the big challenges is that my C-rated house is not the same as someone else's, and this is one of the reasons why EPC is so imperfect, because you know, mine might be a C because I don't own the loft, so it's not insulated, and I've got solid concrete floors and a big huge freaking cold bridge. You know, I can't do anything about my cold bridge unless I can talk somebody into shearing off my balcony. But someone else might be in a C just because they've got some drafty windows, and so it's not very airtight. And there's ways that we can fix it. But I think understanding who needs this dependent on their experience in the home. It's the EPC rating. I'm young-ish, you know, I haven't turned the corner to 50 yet. Get as cold as someone who might be in their 70s or 80s or struggling with a long-term illness. And so what I can accept, you know, if it's 20, I just throw a jumper on. Someone else might need their home to be at 24. And if it's leaky and drafty, you couldn't do that even before the price cap lifted, let alone now. So one of the things that we're working on are some checklists to help understand how people have, you know, how are they experiencing their home? How many people live in it? Do they have enough hot water? Do they, you know, if we put solar panels in, understanding, will that be enough, or will they still have to buy something off the grid? If we insulate enough, is that okay? Or do we need a secondary heating source for those rough days? So I think that's a big piece of it, is just understanding how are they living in their space? Do they have any control over whether or not it gets better? And then as a council, how can we facilitate that no matter what their tenure is? So we are quite tenure agnostic.
Okay, thank you, Tania. And Matt, seen from your point of view, what are your expectations? I mean, you know, you are making the decisions about where the money is ultimately distributed. So obviously you're going to be wanting to see the results come back from that.
Yeah. So put simply, my role is to buy carbon on behalf of the government. And if I turn up at the end of the day and spend a lot of money and I buy no carbon, that would be a bad outcome. And so we have to be able to demonstrate value for money. And there are two lenses to this. There's the fuel poverty lens that we've talked about quite a bit, and then there's the carbon procurement lens. And so I would look for bids from people, from social housing landlords that are strategically sensible, so they fit within a broader context, that they can evidence a form of value for money, and that they can evidence deliverability. And all of those three things we will assess through a bid process. And the key thing, and one of the reasons we've made this Social Housing Retrofit Accelerator available, is to help people frame their arguments in a really cogent way. What we've found, not surprisingly, is this is tough. You know, every archetype, every building turns out to be an individual. And so working out how to make an intervention that is value for money, it's precise, it doesn't create inappropriate outcomes that the tenants buy into, and that can be done at an affordable rate and at pace. This is not an easy gig. You know, frankly, building new houses, that's child's play. Retrofitting the existing housing stock, this is where, you know, it's going to get tough. And the idea of this fund, in part working with the sector that is so engaged, actually is to demonstrate to the rest of the nation what we can do. Owner occupiers, look at what we're doing over here. You know, look at what we're learning. So, you know, my sense is, let's get going on this thesis. Let's get our smartest people at the front of the queue. Let's use some digital data that Russell and Leigh can you know, put on the table, and let's make sure we can put some really compelling bids together. And actually, let's show that we can demonstrate it. You know, if we can demonstrate that we can do this, I will be able to access greater long-term funds. If we demonstrate we can't deliver this, then frankly all bets are off. So it's important we get this right.
So I'm going to move on to the next. I'd like to try and squeeze in one or two more questions. So rather than go to every member of the panel on every question, I'm going to try and move on to the next question, which is, what do you think is the most cost-effective way to impact the energy performance of older properties? Leigh, do you want to start by taking that one?
Thank you, Paul. From all the evidence that we've collected, the most cost-effective way is obviously to insulate a loft. Unfortunately, most people have addressed that, and widely we've insulated to a depth of about 270 mil. After that, if you have a suspended timber floor, all the evidence shows that it's going to be the most cost-effective solution because you're reducing the amount of cold air that comes into the property, first of all. But making that assessment can be difficult. The rising cost of materials is having an impact on things, other measures like EWI, and there's other constraints like planning, like conservation areas, which make that a non-starter. So increasingly we're seeing clients come to us who have kind of weighed up the potential impact and looked at airtightness and looked at underfloor as a major component of that in order to be able to reduce the demand for heat. You're on mute, Paul.
And Russell, I mean, your perspective on this would be interesting, but also, this feels like so just thinking about the cost-effective ways to impact older properties only feels like one piece of the jigsaw. So in thinking about the question, do you think we have all of the pieces of the jigsaw in place so that we can get to net zero by 2050? You're on mute, I think, Russell.
I think we understand enough about the physics. I think I'd like to get that scary number of 400,000 people down to 200,000 by using some of Leigh's tools, scanning technology, bringing the scans into drawings automatically completed before some logic, using some archetype approaches, that kind of thing. As an industry, we need a bit more volume, which is where Matt comes in order for us to be able to justify investing in that stuff. Having the horizons that are slightly longer than the next grant programme would be absolutely essential when we're looking at the non-social housing sector. And I think once we get the real innovators and not just relying on Q-Bot to be innovators in this sector, there are loads of other organisations out there that are dying to move into this, but they don't see it as a prospect because it's just so stop-start. So what Matt's doing with the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund is breaking the catch-22 really, and we're going to see some acceleration, I think, over the next 18 months, considerably on that basis, and hopefully a bit of positive leakage from the social housing sector into the owner-occupiers. There are plenty of retail banks out there that want to lend into this sector, and by golly, we'll probably need them. Because there's plenty of saving to be made now the energy prices are high that could pay for some finance, right? So we just need the catch-22s to be broken, Paul. Really, that's what this is about. We know what we should be putting into buildings, we know how to do it. There are some technological things that we need to develop, but that will only come when there's some long-term programs that we can really hang our hat on.
I understand. So we started a little late, and I did promise a hard stop at 5 o'clock originally, and we're already sort of coming up to 5 past now. So I think we've had our time. First of all, I'd like to thank the panel. I think it's been incredibly helpful and insightful, and very grateful to all of you for participating. I'd like to also thank the people here at Goodman Masson who've made this possible by inviting lots of people along to come and listen to it, and doing all the hard work to get it organised. So thank you very much, everybody, and goodbye.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, everyone.
Very helpful.
Yes.
Thanks, everybody.